All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Tom Nadeau. I'm here again with Dave Tucker, Kyle Mestry, and Brent Salisbury for part two of our previous discussion about evolution of networking. And today, I think we're going to pick up where we left off last time, starting off with how container networking kind of started and got on its feet. And I guess we were going to start off here a little bit talking about how maybe the evolution of Docker networking kind of came out of this, how maybe Open Daylight came out of this, and then some of the other flow-based, Open Flow and SDN, the initial parts of SDN happened. So let's get on with it, guys. What do you think? Thoughts?
Well,
we'll start with Docker, maybe days, I guess.
Yeah, like in the early days, it was all network namespaces, right? Which was cool because that's all from the kernel, and that was, I guess, Brent, that was kind of when you and I got involved, right? It was just bridge networking, it was just network namespaces, and we were trying to figure out what the story was going to look like when we had more than one server running Docker.
Yeah, and the construct was namespaces, and I think we correlated namespaces into subnets, which was probably a mistake in retrospect, because like tying ourselves to this, if it's not in a subnet, subnet equals policy equals isolation equals, at the end of the day, VLANs and, all the nastiness that kind of goes along with that.
Or when they overlap now in data centers and stuff.
Right, yeah. Right. Virtualization, MPLS. But yeah, so like it kind of started out, I think we did this proposal into Docker when we were external of Docker, and I think it was still probably the third most commented issue, and so like people freaked out, and there was various startups that were also working on trying to solve container networking, but kind of the model we came out with was very, very overlay centric, very network centric.
Right.
Well, it was still kind of born a VM model, right. Still, right? I mean, it wasn't. We call it container networking in hindsight, but it was, the
same.
I think that's the classic example, right? I mean, everyone remembers OpenStack Courier, right? That basically tried to treat a container like a VM, because we tried to take all of these OpenStack networking concepts and we just treated them, similar for containers.
Yeah, exactly,
I mean, we did
right.
what we knew,
The OpenStack API, I think, definitely influenced early container work. So it really, Kyle is the PTO of OpenStack networking for a while. Like, I'm sure there was plenty of heated debates around, networking in OpenStack.
There were. Many of us had them with him.
Yeah,
that's right. I think a lot of people on this particular podcast were involved in those.
Yeah, it probably gave you a few gray hairs.
Yeah, definitely, or less hair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like at that time too, right? I mean, I'm trying to think back, like when this was going on and we were starting. I mean, this was sort of 0.5 in the step of SDN evolution too. So people were thinking about like how do you manipulate the network, and sort of like the conundrum you came up with. I remember thinking about like, how the hell can you get data center networking to scale right, much like what you're just describing, and with all the overlapping. Right. And, we had this MPLS VPN model. So we kept going back to that and going, let's add tags to it. Let's add another tag. And that's actually where VXLAN was born from, as I understand it. It kind of came from that thinking a little bit to say, well, let's just add a new context to the whole thing and make that work. But that doesn't work for everybody either, as we found out. Right.
Yeah, let's all talk about bomb traffic on VXLAN, right? And the original designs for that, right? Multicast.
Multicast, right? Yeah, and it's sort of like there was a bunch of these efforts right at the same time, right? There was even before ODL, right? We had OpenFlow and we had the original controllers that were out at the time that were kind of trying to do this. And then we were just talking about this before we started recording, right? At the same time, like some of us, like I was saying, like Dave Ward and I and Ken and Gray and a few other people have been talking about really programmability around this too, like how to manipulate all of this stuff, because there's a lot of this stuff now. It's not just like one router you got to go config. It's you could have thousands of them, right? And they're all just doing a little bit of the whole thing, making a whole thing scale, making it work, and making it secure, right? And it was kind of the thing we were all going through here with these things, right? I mean, like the stack networking we were just talking about, right? I mean, maybe you can revisit some of the evolution of that. Like you mentioned Courier, but before Courier, like it started getting really messy, right? In stack networking, right? We were doing Neutron and...
Well, there was a bunch of problems with that, right? I mean, one of the biggest problems was, you know, the original API was essentially about virtual machines, but we had all of these vendors that were trying to implement the API themselves, right? And so what happened was we ended up with, I think at one point we were close to 50 plugins or something, you know, that we had to manage in Tree, because we had not only all the open source plugins like Open vSwitch or Open Daylight, the Ryu plugin. I remember some folks might remember Ryu.
Yeah,
was
one of
still
the
around
early
by
controllers.
the way.
Yeah,
one of the early ones, right? But we had all the vendor ones, whether it was Cisco, Juniper, Arista, VMware. I mean, all of these different players as well, and you know, just managing that was difficult. And then the problem became with that many implementations, adjusting the kind of the logical constructs became tough because you had all of these people implementing it. So you had to kind of go with this least common denominator model, or you had to allow people to do extensions, which were its own set of problems, because now you as a user are using an implementation with some weird extension that doesn't apply anywhere else. And to be honest, you see this exact same model with Kubernetes today, right? I mean, I know everyone loves CRDs, but really CRDs just kind of mean that you can implement whatever you want.
Well, the other thing this reminds me of too is another kind of on topic, off topic thing we're having now is with IPMI, you know, and it's the same sort of thing. Like, oh, there's a baseline, but the extensions, the vendor plugin part, vastly exceeds the size of the basic thing, and what it causes is weird interop things. And I'm thinking back too about VTEP interop, things like that. Like that didn't work so well out of the box for a long time, right?
So Tom said something last week, and I used it in another forum because it cracked me up. He said, you know, batteries included, but swappable, and then in parentheses, +4 FTEs. Like I know Docker, like, you know, marketing was always like, oh, batteries included but swappable, we're friendly to the community, blah blah blah. But you know, the net is, if you have a platform, like networking probably needs to be fairly tightly coupled to it, unless you're big enough to manage that networking yourself, and unless you're, you know, big enough and have the right skill sets to go in and debug code, add features yourself, get into some bizarre three-way vendor, you know, relationship.
8-way. That's actually why we attacked the programmability angle, right? We were after, like, for the reason you just said, right? I mean, you got to make this thing work on a large scale. And at the time, like, Google had started to become pretty massive and was showing how they were doing it. People were going, geez, you know, how does this work? You know, remember they were even at the time, they were starting to talk about BGP in the data center. I remember we were at like Cisco and not long after that, and going, what? You want to add that to BGP too? But anyway, to change the subject a bit, but back to the like the stack networking thing. Like the interesting thing there is how it evolved, and then it got to the point, right, where it's not really evolved much since, you know, for a couple of years now, right? Anyway, right? It's like we got that model down. And what's interesting for me is that it was like, and Kyle is the best person to talk about this, right? The struggle to get to that point where, like, the arguments all along were, we can't add that. It's too complicated. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it simple. And what happened over time was, like you just said, like the extensions were crazy. But then also, like, the functionality just needed to be there, right? I mean, we're repeating the same thing now with Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes started with, frankly, this naive model of networking, which I know why it was simplified, because app development is easy if you don't have to worry about it, right? But it's sort of like programming in BASIC, like, at some point I need to get down there and get down to the details, right? But you can't, and like that's why we had to invent other stuff, and it's a similar journey, right?
Well, it's kind of unfair to Kubernetes, I think, because this is the cool thing about the container space, at least from my perspective, was that network vendors were completely irrelevant. Like the only platforms that we cared about were Amazon, Google, and Azure, because that's where people were running their stuff. And all of the networking on there is API driven. Like, there are VPCs. Does it work in a VPC? Yes or no? And that was all the customer really cared about. We didn't have to deal with the whole mess of, oh, hey, we've got this stuff, but this stuff over here comes from Juniper. And like, how are you going to get the container stuff to drop into this fabric that we've just gone and paid like multiple millions of, please? That the completely different problem sets.
So that was one of the upsides, right? You really smacked the networking industry upside the head, right? I mean, we've been at multiple networking vendors now. They were frightened of this stuff, still are, right? I mean, it's because that's the good part. It's like it really shook things up. We were at the point where like MPLS was it, right? Well, a little before this, right? And we're like, what? And it really shook things up. It like said, no, we need to do it like this.
So we reinvented it in PLS with EVPN. Oh, sorry.
And SD-WAN again, but that's for a later one.
I mean, I think the fundamental question is, how tightly do you want to tie that bottom layer to some of this, right? And to Dave's point, we spent, 5, 6, 7 years trying to like bolt things on the bottom of the infrastructure layer up higher. And it turns out maybe that doesn't make a ton of sense. Maybe that's not the best approach. Maybe abstracting it is the way to go.
And it's always like my observation now, several times now, I've been through these curves, like back to that thing earlier, there's this tension between simplicity and oversimplicity, but we don't know where that is because we're making it up as we go in a lot of these cases. And so we kind of overswing and then we come back and we arrive at things. That's why I asked you about the stack situation today, because it kind of did that, right? Now it's kind of at a reasonable point where it works, and it's simple. It's sort of like the famous quote, right? It's as simple as possible, but not any simpler, And
I think specific to Kubernetes, we've pushed the complexity to policy and up to stack. So we said, okay, subnets are no longer relevant, right? Every pod's going to have a subnet, and workloads, it doesn't matter what subnet you're on. A workload can be in the same policy across nodes, across subnets, but we're going to tie them all together with this, label/policy. But we didn't really solve anything. We just moved the problem, arguably, to this like super complex policy.
And we actually made it more difficult to manage, right? So these are the deployments that we're seeing now, right? People are trying to and this is a topic again for another podcast, the DevOps, NetOps, whatever evolution. And that's that third stage that I was implying, right? That's after NetOps. I mean, after DevOps. I talk to engineers all the time who are like, I don't know how to set up service mesh. How the hell do I, in policies and what? It's like you're saying, right? Like we just pushed it over there and changed all the names. Now you get something else to learn. And there's clearly some work to be done there, right? So what else we got? And we were talking about Docker earlier on. We had, what specifically, like you guys were talking about the subnet issue and that sort of thing. Like, how did you get through that? How did you get to the point where you made it work?
Overlays. What was funny, right? Talking to customers early days of Socket Plane, we wanted to do everything. We wanted to come up with a new way of doing networking. It was going to be amazing. And you go talk to a customer and they'd say, yeah, can you just drop it onto VLANs? We know how to deal with VLANs. So just like take all the container stuff, have a drop off on the VLAN. That'll be great. And you know. So on one side, we had customers that wanted that. And then on the other side, we were thinking, well, this whole thing is dumb. Everything needs to be routed. We need like BGP in here somewhere because we want to be sending like updates for small prefixes everywhere. And BGP is about the only thing that can handle that type of thing at that scale. And Project Calico was kind of exactly that, right, Brent? That was kind of it could have been the thing that we ended up doing, but it already existed and had the backing of Metaswitch and some very smart people.
And do you have a sense of like the type of customer? Because I actually have an example of what I'm seeing, what you just described, but in Kubernetes today. Is like enterprise telco, academic, web scale,
Yeah, it was enterprises wanted VLANs. Even some of the web scale places wanted VLANs as well, just purely because their operations teams were way more advanced and already had automation that could handle all of that stuff. So they've already got everything in place. VLAN is the unit, deal with that. I think we were looking at the next generation to kind of go into that routing everywhere. If you were building from scratch, you weren't going to go out there and spend $1 million on a fabric, and you wanted something interesting that was going to be able to get you the mileage, then we were advocating for routed all the way to the edge.
So that's interesting, because that's kind of what I'm seeing now with Kubernetes is a similar, we like it simple like this over here. We like it flexible over here. Typically telco, fintech kind of folks like super customized, manual, sort of like the analogies. They want the fighter cockpit, they want 5,000 settings, right? And then you go to the enterprise setting and it's just the reality. They want 3 easy buttons and make it work, and that's cool. I mean, that's just how it works. But it's interesting. We're seeing that repeat again as well. Cool.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's on-prem versus cloud too, right? If you're on-prem, you're running a network, you've got infrastructure, and you've got to figure out, how do I get visibility end to end? How do I operate it? How do I fit it into, some semblance of sanity where it's not just ops is going to go off and do whatever they want and build a network, and we're going to have no idea how it works. And when it breaks, don't call us. We didn't set it up.
And that is a very appealing part of the whole cloud thing, right? I mean, it's out there and it works, right? It's not my problem.
Right.
It's like Blue Man said, it's away,
Well, yeah, I think the one thing that sucked more about the on-prem stuff was network management never happened. Like there is not one good network management product that I could name. However, you want a network in AWS, there you go. Like everything you need to provision it, everything you need to like operate it, that's all there. Debug
Single
tools,
pane of glass.
Yep.
Everything. Yeah. Done. Beautiful. Yeah. And in fact, that's an interesting topic for another chat. I mean, I'll make the assertion that, there's, like you were saying, Dave, there's not one awesome product out there. And in fact, you can whittle it down. Even I hypothesize that you can whittle that down further to say, if you have a single vendor network, you probably have a management solution that can work on that and manipulate it and program it and control it. But as soon as, like you said, as soon as you bring in another one, I don't know. But pros and cons, right?
Cisco works.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love it.
Love it. Yeah.
Love it. I mean, there's some good early stuff. I've got one Cisco Works fun story. So it was probably like early 2000s. I was going to do an upgrade. They wanted to upgrade the entire network using Cisco Works, and they were like, okay, well, let's try it on like 20 switches first. So what it ended up doing was going in, blowing away all the ROMs, blew away the boot flash, and said it's done, ready to go. Obviously, things have evolved now.
It's fresh and new.
Yeah, if I didn't have this crappy Perl script there to go out and validate that everything was good before you hit the reboot button, you would have bricked the switch log. So, like CI is something that we're going to get to. That's an upcoming topic as well.
Cool. Hey, and with that in mind, we're up on our time here. So we'll wrap it up today and invite everybody back for the next one where we'll carry on with this and some other cool and interesting topics in the area networking.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening again.
If you're out there and have some ideas that you want to come on and talk about, hit us up. We'll have a Twitter account, an email account, and get all official.
Yeah, you can even go to thenet.lol.
Thenet.lol.
And that's there too.
Any
last words, Dave, on the way out?
Well, you can find us on Freenode. We'll also have to set up an IRC channel as well.
IRC forever. All right. Thanks, you guys. We'll see you on the next one.